welcome to the Voice of the Coast. I am your host, Danica Foley Long. With me, we have Tim Mott, who is the Executive Director with St. Mary Levee District. And at the top of my head, I want to say mayor, but you're going to always be mayor. You know that. So, but welcome to the show.
Glad to be here.
Awesome. So at the top of my head right now is Bayou Chene. We are so close to having that open, but right now there's going to be kind of a temporary closure because you're going to be moving in that huge barge. Pretty much the center of it all is that barge.
It very much is the center. When we say huge, yes, you're talking about 400 foot long, so more than a football field long, and 80 foot wide. So and has a depth of 29 feet. So this is a very large structure, and it's floating right now. It's been floating for a few months now, but it's near the Bollinger Yard. Next on Monday the 14th, it's scheduled to be towed over to the actual flood wall, which is also complete in its construction, and floated over for installation purposes. So what happens, it sits on a pivot. I use my arm it sits on a pivot, and so this pivot pile is the final step. You float the barge over, sink it into position, then drive the pivot pile. So you know everything fits exactly like it's supposed to in that particular case. And so that process will start on the 14th. So the mariners have been noticed that Bayou Chene will be closed for about 5 days that entire week to traffic because one, there's a lot of equipment being moved into place, and number two, physically the barge is going to be in place, and so there won't be a way around it. So until that installation takes place. Once it does, we'll swing the barge back open. They'll finish doing some other work to it, and at that time, traffic, marine traffic can return.
I didn't know it was 400 feet wide. That is huge. So just curious about maintenance on such a project.
Yeah, it's going to be a lot.
It's going to be a lot. Okay. So,
it's going to be a lot. Well, Not only that, in moving it, if you can imagine, moving a 400-foot barge is not going to be an easy undertaking. And as I remind people, Levee District has 3 employees. Me, our operations manager, Mike Bracata, and Shelley Scully, our secretary. So obviously we have plans to involve much more folks than that in the closure process. In fact, we'll use some tugboats and so forth to do that when we start operating it. The project is slightly behind schedule in the sense we had originally talked about a September-October completion time frame, but we're delayed a bit because we've added on to the project for some other features, and so that's extended it. But I've been telling people since late last year, if we have a flood, we're ready. We can close it, and if it happened today before we install the barge, we can float that barge over, sink it, and put it in place. So we have the function of that structure is really already there, okay, or the capability for closing it. This is going to be the finishing touches that will then make it operational, and we'll get that going.
And of course, this is a very good illustration. How long will it take for that to open and close?
It's probably a 5 or 6 hour process in the sense that in order to swing it over, you're going to want to lift it, so you're going to empty the barge. And as a result of that, making it a little lighter and a little easier to handle, then you're going to swing it over and get it into position where it's going to finally sit for closure, and you're going to sink it. And so that, pumping all of that water in there, you can imagine 400 foot by 80 foot by 29 feet. That's a huge volume of water. So we're pumping all of that water in or pumping all that water out, depending on whether we're opening or closing.
Now you said 29 feet. Typically, the authorized depth is 20, so we're getting an additional 9 feet depth.
This is how that works. The actual sill for the barge is at a -24. Okay, and that's so for navigation purposes, there should be no issues with boats or structures going across, during navigation. So when it sits on that sill, which is at -24, we have a +5 that comes, that extends. We extend to a +5 outside of that.
Okay. And then let's talk about dredging. Is that waterway going to constantly be dredged? I mean, how often will it have to
Well,
undergo
Bayou
dredging?
Chene does not have the same sediment load and problems that you have in, say, the Atchafalaya River, okay, because there's a constant flow. However, it's an issue, and in fact, I think there's some dredging scheduled for this year. Now, we dredged the entire footprint of the project before construction, so it's fairly clear in the vicinity. It's the areas, you know, north and south of there that you'd be concerned about.
Okay. I want to talk a little bit more about it. Bayou Chene is, I mean, it's just right here. We've been waiting for years. I'm sure the people who are native to this area have been waiting for since 1973.
Right.
So come on back right here on The Voice of the Coast with yours truly. Welcome back to The Voice of the Coast. Again, I am your host, Danica Foley-Long. With me, we have Tim Mott, the Executive Director with St. Mary Levee District. And we're still talking about Bayou Chene, so let's get back into it because I want to know everything there is to know about this project. I have learned so much about dredging and waterways, and I actually ran into a lady the other day who said, I learned a lot too. I know more about waterways than I anticipated. Same here. So let's get back with Bayou Chene. And you mentioned some additional features. What are some of those additional features that kind of delayed the project a little bit?
Well, the one that's under construction right now, I think, is probably the best example of it. When the barge, originally when we designed the barge, for cost savings purposes, when the barge was going to be set in its open position, we were just going to let it float and susceptible to the rises and falls of the water. After the hurricanes, we started wondering about, well, what's the best way to protect us from having a damage to the barge? And so we came up with the concept of what's called storage piles. So now we're driving piles under the area so that the barge, when it's in its open position, will sit on piles. And so that's an example of one of the projects that we added to it.
And what does that do exactly?
Well, it's going to make that barge a little more secure. If it's, let's say a hurricane is coming, we're not planning on operating the barge, and it's just sitting out there. Now it's sitting on a hard, secure bottom instead of just floating with a tide that may go up and down.
Now, how frequently do we anticipate that closing? Just really for weather concerns, right? I mean,
absolutely. Well, first off, it's intended to be a riverine flood protection item. So what that means is when the river's high and we got all the backwater flooding that affects all of us through Terrebonne and Assumption and Lafourche and St. Martin parishes, that's what we're trying to prevent. And so that's what it's intended to operate as. We also recognize that in certain hurricanes, it could be advantageous. The best example that I can think of is during Hurricane Barry. Hurricane Barry came in when the river was high. In fact, Bayou Chene was closed because of the river at that time. Okay. Hurricane Barry came in, and we definitely saw the type, some relief from having the structure closed.
Now, this is something you probably you didn't see coming, but I'm going to ask anyway. This is Bayou Chene, but this, you mentioned it. It actually protects several parishes.
Right.
Have those parishes, besides St. Mary, have they forked over some monies and helped out?
The plan is for us to share the operating and maintenance cost of that. And so we have agreements that we've been working on with those entities with a cost-sharing plan for us to share those costs.
Right, because about how many parishes are involved in this?
6.
6,
yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
Okay, I do remember that. Like I said, you answered it perfectly.
Yeah.
I had to ask that because, again, we always hear about St. Mary Levee District
sure.
being involved with this, but we never hear of any other
Right.
parishes involved, so that's good to know. All right, and we're in February, so right after that, typically we're getting right into spring, and we get that spring flood because that's what for backwater flooding.
Right.
We always get that. Is that considered backwater flooding? The water that comes.
Well, the water that comes down the
Yes.
Atchafalaya is not considered backwater, but the result of it coming back up by Chene is backwater flooding.
Okay,
so,
there
yes.
we go.
Yeah.
So, do I anticipate a spring flood 2022?
Well, we haven't gotten any indication yet. We were talking about this in the office today. There's a major front coming across, and it's dropping a lot of snow and rain and sleet and all of these affecting all these areas. It's in that valley. It's that same valley that will affect us. So it's an example of what you have to watch for. And then, now, What is that going to mean in March, April, and May? We don't know. It's too early at this point. But.
And it's so crazy with the weather we've been having. It's coming quickly.
Yeah.
It's like at least the forecast we could say, oh, we're about a month or two out now because it's just dumping on us right now. So
I think the only advantage we have is that this year, for the first time, we've actually had a low water season. In years past, we haven't had one in a while.
Okay, we're going to mention the closure one more time because that is coming up again. If you are a mariner, you use that route, here's the closure just for a week, not very long at all, but it'll be open up right after that. Well, that actually, not my words, it will open, correct? Right after that?
Yes, unless there's some major reason not to, yes.
Okay, we're going to take another break, but come on back. We've got other projects to talk about, but I just had to talk about Bayou Chene because that was top of mind, and we've been working on this for so long. And I think really the last major event was 2011.
The last major event was 2019. It was closed on an emergency basis in 2019.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah. Well, come on back right here on the Voice of the Coast. Welcome back to the Voice of the Coast. I'm here with Executive Director of St. Mary Levee District, Tim Mott. Now we're going to talk about something else outside of Bayou Chene. That's the Yoakley project, and that is along the Sherrington Canal. I recall that, and many of you probably remember, it was pretty much plastered all over social media. In the middle of the night, I think a lot of the public officials, Levee District members, were out there with sandbags trying to fill a hole which is along the Sherrington Canal because that water was coming in onto properties for at least one business, and that's Metal Shark. Yeah. What's the status of that project?
Yes, actually the permanent solution to that problem is that project is under construction right now. We let that contract a few months back, and the contractors have been out there working on it. That project is, if you recall, the work that was done actually goes all the way back to 2011 when HESCOs were put there during the 2011 flood fight. Well, those same HESCOs and then some rehabilitated HESCOs were used for hurricane storm surge protection. As a result of that, though, the shipyard, particularly Metal Shark, flooded during that time. And so as a result of that, they said, hey, we would like you to consider moving that protection out to the waterfront. They understood that it would have to go across their property. And so we also visited with Gulfcraft at the time, and I think them seeing the impact of that on the Metal Shark said, yeah, we might want that protection too. So it's not just to protect those two businesses, though. What happens is, without a barrier there, that water flows into that area and flows all the way to Northwest Boulevard in Franklin. Wow. From there, it's got to go out at the Yoakley pump station, which is all the way under the overpass when you're coming into to Franklin. So it's a big deal. What would happen in that case, if you had storm surge coming up there and you were pumping water out, you'd never win the battle because the water would constantly coming in and you'd just keep pumping. You'd be circulating water. So what this does is it creates a barrier across there. The big thing with the two shipyards there, we had to figure out a way to allow them to have waterfront access with a barrier going across. And so the solution we came up with was to put in temporary floodgates. So there'll be a system set up across there with earthen levees. It'll tie into this flood wall, and then in the event we have a storm, we'll be able to slip in these temporary flood walls and close that area off, protect those. Once the storm threat passes, we pull those flood walls, they go back to work, and they won't have the issues they've had in the past with having to clean up their yards and everything else from all of the debris, the silt, and everything else that would flow in from there.
How wide is that enclosure?
They're not really that wide in the sense. Really, what they are, it's called stop logs. Basically, it's going to be about a 20-foot wide. If you kind of picture a log, but you would slide it into some slots that would then stack up and get to the elevation. So we'll build that to a plus 10 and a half foot elevation along that waterfront.
Okay. Yeah. And how long does that take to put in? I mean,
that's going to be a good question. It obviously is going to take some time. It's going to take some equipment to be able to do that. But the good thing with a a hurricane is you get a little bit of warning. You know, you got a notice of 4 or 5 days, so you have time to get out there and put that in. Less so, you have more of a warning with a riverine event than you do with a storm surge. But anyway, that's the plan for that one. And as I said, we're excited about that project because it's under construction today.
And how long do we expect that to be out?
Well, probably we're looking at maybe an August time frame for that one to be complete.
Oh, right in time.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Obviously, we would have liked to have beginning of hurricane season,
Yeah.
but I think somewhere in the meat of hurricane season we'll be completing that one.
Awesome, because those two, and like you said, it's just not for those companies, but
Right. Oh no,
I mean,
no, it's
you have to
definitely
go
not.
through
Yep.
what was Barry, you mentioned Delta and Laura,
Yep.
so we don't want to go through any more.
No,
future.
the temporary flood fights have been costly and difficult and so forth.
All right, come on back. We've got another segment, at least 2 more to go. So come on back right here on the Voice of the Coast. What was it? Welcome back. We're going to talk fast because there are a couple of things we want to cover. This is the last segment. I wasn't sure. So let's talk about Bayou Tesh flood control structure. You guys had the ribbon cutting back in maybe October, November. Very good because that's for from Franklin to like Centerville, Verdeville area. That's going to stop a lot of that water coming in, going into people's properties. And
Yeah, it's actually the same water we were just talking about in the sense of the storm surge coming up the Sharonton Canal. When it gets to Bayou Tesh, it would fill in and flood Bayou Tesh, and that's why subdivisions like Hazelwood and Eastwood in the Franklin area, overtopping the banks in the Franklin area, and threatening some of the houses along the Centerville area along Bayou Tesh, that's where that comes from. Now we've got the ability with a floating barge gate to close that off, protect that area. As soon as the storm passes, we open it back up, let the water drain out and kind of go back to normal. So that's fully operational, ready to go, and all we need is a storm to cause us to operate it. So.
now that opens frequently, right? Because you allow.
Well, it stays open all the time.
It does.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's just
only
going to close
closed.
only when we have a storm.
Gotcha. Okay. Now, this project, I'd never even heard of this. This is like really, I feel like maybe my first time hearing about the replacement of the Sharonton floodgate.
Yep.
And you said it was welded shut. Kind of explain that.
Historically, there's been a floodgate along the Atchafalaya Basin levee just north of the Sharonton area, okay? And what that used to do is allow boat traffic, water access from Bayou Tesh to the Atchafalaya River through the levee, okay? So now what's happened is that floodgate during the 2011, it had to get welded shut and they had to do some flood fighting there because they were anticipating this really high flow level there. The floodgate is lower by a few feet than the top of the levee, okay? So it's obviously a deficiency in the levee. So what's happening is through the infrastructure bill and the disaster bill that was announced a month ago, they're allocating money to actually replace that floodgate. And so main thing, it'll be built to the right elevation, and 2, it'll be fully operational. So theoretically, at some point, they'll be able to, and I say theoretically only because it all depends on the water levels, but you would actually be able to open that gate and allow flow between Bayou Tesh and the Atchafalaya River. But more importantly, we'll be able to close that gate and have the level of protection that we need from flooding from the Atchafalaya River.
And what's the price tag on that?
It's in excess of $40 million. Now that one's not going to come through the St. Mary Levee District. We have some minor role in that, but in getting land rights and things like that. But it's a Corps of Engineers project. Yeah.
Oh, well, it could take forever then. I mean, let's just. I guess I can say it. You can't say it, but.
Well, they've had, but they've actually been corresponding with us about the land rights. So that project is actually under. The planning for that project is underway. The planning for that project. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, and then of course through that same infrastructure bill, there are going to be some levees that you're going to do some upgrades to.
And there again, these will all be Corps of Engineers projects. So we're not clear on all the details, but one project that was allocated about $10 million, it's what's called the East-West tie-in. So the levees where Highway 317 crosses the intercoastal waterway. If you look down as you're coming over that big bridge, you've got Cabot on one side and you've got the other carbon black plant on one side. Well, North Bend was a project that we finished over the last couple of years, which is to close the gap on the north side of the GIWW. So now the east-west tie-in closes the gap that existed on the south end. So this particular one will help protect the people along Bayou Sally down towards Burns Point. Now Burns Point's probably still the problem area, but there won't be water coming in from the Gulf and the Coastal Waterway into there because they're putting a levee there.
And I remember water coming up. Is that maybe 2008? Was that like Gustav?
Probably
One of
Gustav
them.
or Ike.
Okay,
Probably Ike,
yeah, okay.
more likely, yes.
Yeah, because I remember water coming across the roadway
Right.
for that. Yes, okay. Now, I haven't been to a Levee District meeting in quite some time, so can you kind of tell us who are some of the newer members on the board?
Well, we did have a couple of replacements just this past year. We have two new ones, Mike Ortiz and Danny Lepre, both kind of generally from the west, I'd say the middle of the parish in the Patterson area, but both good members, and we look forward to working with them.
Okay, how long have they been on the board?
They both got appointed last year during 21, say middle of 21.
Gotcha. All right, well, that's going to be it. Thank you again so much for coming out. I really appreciate it. As always, thank you for joining us. Make sure to subscribe to us on Facebook. We are KWBJ TV 22, but also subscribe to us on Facebook. We are KWBJ Live. That is all the time we have. Take care.